We begin the Gemara today on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph at the top of the Amud, the second line from the top. The Gemara continues a discussion that we had here regarding the halacha of mezainis. The daughters of a person after he passes away, so they get fed from the father's possessions. All right, so which means that the sons that inherited, they have to make sure that from their father, whatever inheritance there is, the daughters get fed. But the question was, does that mean that they only get fed from karka, from land, or even from metaltalin, even from money or any other movable possessions? So there was a discussion in the Gemara back and forth about this. So the Gemara brings now another psak din about this. Hahu yasem v'yisayma. There was a yasem, a yisayma, so this is a son and a daughter that their father passed away. And now the question was, there was an apotropos. There was an apotropos, a caretaker. In many cases, you have a caretaker that takes care of the yasem and the yisayma. So they came to Rava to figure out, what do we do over here? The Yasam is the one that inherits, and the Yisayim is the one that has to get fed. She's the daughter that has to get fed here. So they came to Rava to ask exactly from what is the obligation that she should be fed. Amalahu Rava, so Rava said, Hello liyasim b'shvil Yisayim. What you should do is give the Yasim, this caretaker, he should give the Yasim, the food that he feeds the Yasim, give extra food for the Yasim so that'll have enough for himself, and also enough to share with his sister, with the Yisayim as well. Which means the Yasim, the caretaker, is giving him food not only from karka, but even from a taltalin, even from whatever money the father left in the bank account. He's taking out money to buy food for the Yasim. So he says, buy enough food that food will also be for the Yisayim. Okay, essentially what Rav is saying is that you can use even money, not just karka, to feed the daughter, to feed the sister. So the Rabbanan asked Rav about this. Why are you saying so? You, the master, you're the one that said that that the daughter has to be fed from the father's, for the inheritance of the father, for that came from the father, but only from karka, from land, not from a taltalin, not from any movable items. And you said this, so this is true. Beilim Mezayni, when it comes to feeding one of the daughters, Beilim Kesubos, when it comes to paying the wife the Kesubos, or Beilim Parnasa. And Rav actually said this also regarding Parnasa, which refers to the money that has to be provided for a girl to be able to get married. Even this should only be collected from karka and not from a taltalin. So why are you telling over here this caretaker to feed the yasim enough, and it should be leftovers for the Yisayim, which would then mean that the Yisayim is taking her food even from a taltalin, even from the money, not just from karka? So Rav responded and explained as follows. If this Yasim, if he would want a maid to serve him, would we not provide for the Yasim a maid to serve him? So that's part of what the Yasim has to be taken care of. We have to take care of him in every way. We have to feed the Yasim, and we also have to provide for him a maid. So over here as well, he has a sister that can be together with him and serve him. So Kol Shekain Hacha over here, definitely the Yasim, it's for the Yasim's benefit to feed the Yisayim along with him, the Ketarti. Because over here you're accomplishing two things. Number one, his sister is going to be able to live with him. His sister is not going to have to go and knock on doors and go live somewhere else. His sister can live with him over here in the house, and therefore she's going to be here to serve him. And at the same time, she's also going to get fed. So true, even if in a usual case we do not feed the Yisayim from metaltalin, but in this case, if it serves the Yasim well, and it's a benefit for the Yasim, we're able to serve the Yasim, the Yisayim that is even from the metaltalin as well. Tana Rabbanon, now the Gemara, after all of this is the whole discussion we had, different Amirayim that discussed this matter. Here the Gemara brings a Braise that we will see here that this is a Machlokes Tanaim. Again, regarding the mezainis of the daughters, if they take their mezainis only from karka or even from metaltalin. So we learned in the Braise as follows. Echad nechasim sheyesh la machrayas, were the properties that they serve as achrayas, as responsibility. Now, this is an expression that's used in the Gemara many times, and this means karka. This refers to land. And the reason why it's called nechasim sheyesh la machrayas is because when a malva wants to collect a loan, where does he go to? He goes to karka. He knows the karka is not moving anywhere. This is where I can collect my loan from. So that's why it's called yesh la machrayas. V'echad nechasim she'ein la machrayas. Or when you have properties that you have no security to collect from them because it's movable items and it could go anywhere. So again, karka or metaltalin, maitzian lemazan isha, we use this to collect from it, to feed the wife of this person that passed away, ulubanais, and also for the daughters of this person that passed away. Divrei Rabbi, this is Rabbi's opinion. Okay, so here Rabbi clearly says that we feed the daughters whether from karka or from a taltalin. However, Rav Shimon ben Elazar argues, and there's a lot of details on what Rav Shimon ben Elazar says. Let's break it up. First, Rav Shimon ben Elazar addresses karka. What do you use karka for? So when it comes to nechasim sheyesh lam achrayis, the properties that serve as an achrayis, as a security. So what's the story with this part of the inheritance? So first, moitziin levanois min abanim. We take from the properties, from the sons that inherited these properties, we take from there to feed the daughters. Right, so here he's clearly saying, when you have to feed the daughters, where does it come from? From the karka. And now another point he says, now this is unrelated to what we're discussing here, but he goes through all the different details regarding the inheritance of karka. Ulobanais min abanais. If a person only left daughters, now if there's only daughters, they're all inheriting equally. So let's say there are daughters that are older, daughters that are younger. So the older daughters that are aware of what's going on take all the karka for themselves, and the younger daughters that don't know what's happening don't have any karka for themselves. So what do you have to do here? So you have to make sure to distribute it equally amongst them. And the same thing also, lebanim min abanim. If you have sons, there's a bunch of sons that are inheriting, and you have the older sons that inherit, and you have the younger ones that didn't get anything. You have to make sure to distribute it amongst them equally. Okay, so this section of what Rav Shimon ben Elazar is speaking about has nothing to do with the union of mezainis, but this is b'chlal b'negei to the Yerusha, that the Yerusha amongst the older and the younger ones has to always be equally. And then also ulevanim min habanais, and if the daughters took from the karka for themselves, even though they're not supposed to inherit anything. If there are sons here, the sons are the ones that inherit. So if the daughters took for themselves from this karka, so you have to return it to the sons. And he says, when is this? B'nechasim mirubin. If there's enough properties to be able to feed these daughters until they become mature enough, until they become older, which is the age of the bagris to become a begeres, so then the sons inherit these properties. So if the daughters took it, you have to take it back and give it to the sons. But that's only if there's nechasim merubin, if there's enough properties that they can be fed from it. So that has to be given back to the sons. Avaloi lebanim min abanais b'nechasim mu'atin. If there are very little properties and there's not enough over here to be able to feed the daughters until they're older, so then the sons don't inherit anything. So then these properties go to the girls, so they should have what to eat. In that case, there's no Yerusha. As we learned before, this takan of Chazal b'negeya to feeding the daughters, if it's a case that there's not enough for the Yerusha of the banim, so the banis get it. Okay? The chasib. So till here, Rav Shimon ben Elazar is talking about the karka. This is the halacha b'negeya to the inheritance of nechasim shesh lam achrayis, which is karka. Now, nechasim she'en lam achrayis, all of the other possessions, which are the metaltlin, the movable items, Maitziin, Levanim, and Abanim. So again, if there are some sons that took more than the others, the older ones took more than the younger ones, you have to distribute it equally. Ulevanis min Abanis. And the same also with daughters. If the older ones took more than the younger ones, you have to make sure that everyone gets equally. Ulevanim min Abanis. And also, if the girls took for themselves, so you have to take it from them and give it back to the sons. They are the ones that inherit, not the daughters. Aval, and here comes the key, which is relevant over here for what we're speaking about regarding feeding the daughters. Avaloi lebanais min abanim. We do not feed the daughters from the metaltalin that the sons took from the father's inheritance. So right here, Rav Shimon ben Elazar is arguing with Rabbi. Rabbi says when it comes to feeding the daughters, you feed them from the metaltalin and the karka equally. What does Rav Shimon ben Elazar say? Karka, you can feed them. But from the metaltalin, loy lebanis min abanim. You don't feed the daughters from the metaltalin. So here we clearly see this is machlekes tanaim. Gemara concludes this whole discussion. Usually the rule is anytime there's an argument between Rabbi and another Tana, we paskin like Rabbi. However, over here, halacha kereb Shimon ben Elazar. Over here, this is an exception. We paskin like Reb Shimon ben Elazar. And we know this because the Amar Rava said, Hilchase, the halacha is, mimekarkoi, that we collect only from karka, from the land, v'loi mimetaltali, and not from movable items. Bein l'ksuba, that is when you're collecting the ksuba for the wife. And also, bein l'mezaini, when you're collecting to feed the daughters. And bein l'parnasa, and also when you're collecting the money to marry off the daughters, you only collect from karka and not from metaltalin, like the opinion of Shimon ben Elazar. Taisus points out here, just one detail, when it says regarding parnasa, In the Gemara before, we learned yesterday, it said that when it comes to Parnasa, you have to give the daughters for their chasana from anything, both from Kaka and from a Taltalin, to make sure that they can get married, and there's no limitations. And here, Rava is saying that even when it comes to Parnasa, to marry them off, you only give them from Karka. So Taisa says the difference is, if you know what the father would give and you estimate the level of what exactly the father, the standard of what the father would want to give for his daughters, then you could collect from anything. Karka, metaltalin, makes no difference. But over here, what Rav is speaking about is in a case where we don't know what the father's standard is, or the father's standard has not been estimated, and you're just taking a certain basic amount that's necessary for the parnasa, for the marriage of the daughter. In such a case, you only collect from Karka and not from metaltalin.
So Rav, what's up Psak Halacha? How do you
right here. Rav Shimon ben Elazar.
Which is?
That you take only from Karka. Zok the Heilige Mishnah, returning back to the halachas of Kesubos. So here, this is actually one of the first Mishnahs in the whole Masechta that discusses the actual halacha of the Kesubos itself. When you get to, you're supposed to write a Kesubos, right? What happens if you don't write a Kesubos? So then the wife does not get a Kesubos b'chlal. So the Mishnah says, Loi kosav lo Kesubos. What happens if the husband did not write for his wife a Kesubos? Besula goyim Messiah, it doesn't matter. If she's a Besula, she gets the right amount for a Besula, which is 200, and Valmana mana. And an Almana gets 1 mana. Why? Mipnei shu tnai bezdin. A Kesubos in a marriage is a tnai bezdin. This is a condition that Chachamim instituted, that you only get married on the condition that you'll give a Kesubos to your wife if she becomes a widow or if you divorce her. Doesn't matter if you actually wrote it or if you didn't write it. That's a tnai in the marriage. Kosav law, how about if he didn't completely forget to write a Kesubos, but he wrote differently than you usually write? Kosav law sada shavim mona tachas mesayim zuz. He's marrying a wife, which is a Besula, and he writes her that this is the field, this is the property that I'm designating for your Kesubos, and that property is only worth 1 mana instead of 200. And additionally, he didn't write like it's written in every Kesubos. V'loi kosav law, he did not write into the Kesubos, kol mechosim the isli achrayin l'ksubasech. All of the properties that I own are there as a security for you to collect your Kesubos. Nevertheless, he'll be chayiv to pay the full amount, and all of his properties will become obliged to as a security for this payment of the Kesubos without writing it. Again, this is part of the Tnai Bezdin that it becomes obligated for the payment of the Kesubos. Furthermore, there's other details that are written inside the Kesubos, which we already learned about. Let me just add again, Shehu Tnai Bezdin, because all of these things is part of the condition of a Bezdin, meaning Chachamim instituted that this is part of the marriage. Now, we already learned before in the Mishnah is that there are additional obligations a husband has to the wife. For example, if a person's wife gets captured, he has to redeem her. And so, what if that wasn't written into the Kesubos either? Loi kosav law, he didn't write into the Kesubos. Im tishtaboy, if you get captured, afra kinoch, I will redeem you. Veisfinach lili into, and I will bring you back to be my wife. Ubekehenes, when it comes to a person that's marrying to a wife that's marrying a kohen, so over there you write into the Kesubos a little bit differently. Ahadrinach lemedinosech, I will return you to your country, to your home. Meaning, after by a wife of a kohen, if she got captured, she can't go back to her husband, as we learned already earlier in the Masechta, in the first and second Pedic, because now there's a suspicion that she had a relation with someone else in captivity, and even if it was against her will, she can't go back to her husband. By Yisrael, she can go back to her husband if it was against her will. But by a kehenes, meaning she was married to a kohen, she can't go back to her husband. But nevertheless, the husband takes responsibility to redeem her and bring her back to her home. So even if this wasn't written, chayiv, he's still obligated to do so. Shehut nai bezdin. Again, this is a condition of the bezdin, part of the marriage. Nishbis, so if she was captured, chayiv livdaisa. This is Bechlal. Now it's speaking about Bechlal. Benegate to every single marriage of Chas v'Shalom that happens, she was captured, you're obligated to redeem her. Mama, if the husband comes along and says, you know what, instead of me bothering with redeeming her, Hare Gita Ksubasa, here, I give her a get, and I'm paying her all the Ksubah, and V'tifta Asatzma, let her go and redeem herself, let her take care of herself. Ain't it a shoy? He's not allowed to do such a thing. Once he's married to her, he took this responsibility, he has to redeem her, as he did the responsibility accepted upon himself. Loksa, if she got not well, chayav l'rapaisa. His responsibility as well is also all of her medical needs to go and heal her. However, here, this case is different. Amar Hare Gita Ksubasa. If he comes and tells you, here's a get and here's your ksuba money, and take care of yourself, terapes atzma, she should heal herself, rashoy. A husband is allowed to do this. Now, and it's not exactly clear what's the distinction. Rashi over here says something, but it's not exactly clear what Rashi means. But from what I understood, what it says in the Farshim is, when it comes to a woman that got captured, so this is a one-time thing that right now he has to pay for her release. So therefore, he's married to her right now, so he's obligated to go and pay for her release. But when it comes to healing and paying the medical bills, which is an ongoing thing day after day, so that's something that he could say, I would pay for today, but I'm not paying continuously, so therefore that's something that he could say, that I'm going to divorce you today, and therefore all the continuous bills afterwards is something you're going to have to take care of yourself. Zakta Gemara, that is, Mani, who is our Mishnah here? Who is the Tan of our Mishnah? Rab Meir. The Tan of our Mishnah is Rab Meir. The Amar, Rab Meir says, and this we're going to learn this later, that Kol HaPeichus LeBesula Mimasayim. Anybody that is giving a ksuba for a besula less than the amount that he's supposed to, less than 200, or almana mimana, and he gives to an almana only a mana, harei zu be'ilas nus. So this is a bilas nus, and the whole marriage is not a marriage. So if he lived with her, he's living with her like outside of marriage, b'chlal. Right? In other words, if you're only giving less than this amount, it's not a marriage b'chlal. It's a condition. It's a condition in the marriage, like the Mishnah said. It's a t'nai bezdin. So there is no such a thing that a person is obligated to give less than what the Chachamim obligated him to give. Rabbi Yehuda, if our Mishnah would be following Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says it's possible that a person is only obligated to give less than the amount that Chachamim instituted. Rabbi Yehuda said, Rotza, if he wants, Kesubos lebesula shtashel mesayim. He writes to the besula a ksubah, a document that it says that he's giving her 200, but vihi kesubos, she can write and say, Hiskabalti mimcha mana. I received already from you a mana, even if she did not receive, but she's sort of being meichel. She's forgiving on the half of her ksubah, and now the husband, right from the beginning of the marriage, is only obligated to give one mana. Ula almana mana, and in the same also regarding an almana, if she wants, she can go ahead and write that the husband writes her a mana, and I already got from you 50, and therefore you're only obligated to give me half of the ksubah. So we see over here that Rabbi Yehuda says that you don't have to give your wife the entire ksubah. If she wants, she could forgive it, and you're only obligated to give her half. But Rabbi Meir says there's no such a thing as forgiving the ksubah. You have to give the full ksubah. And that's what it said in our Mishnah, that it's a t'nai bezdin that you must give the full ksubah. So that's what we see regarding the beginning of our Mishnah. It's who's the opinion? Rabbi Meir. Now, if so, let's not take a look what it says in the Seif of the Mishnah. And here we'll see that it's the reverse. It's not Rabbi Meir's opinion, but it's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So the Mishnah said afterwards, Kostav la sadashav mana tachas Messiah. He wrote Messiah Zus. He wrote to her that there's this property which you could collect from, and it's only worth a mana instead of 200. And also, and this is what's relevant for our discussion here, V'loi kostav la, he did not write to her in the ksubah, kol nechasim de isli achrayin l'ksubasech. All of the properties that I own are a security that you could collect from there, your ksubah. Chayiv, nevertheless, all the properties that he owns still will become a security for the ksubah, shu t'nai bezdin, because that's part of the t'nai of the bezdin. Even if it wasn't written, it's an automatic condition that she can go and collect from any of those properties. Now, this part of the Mishnah, the Sefer, also Rabbi Yehuda. This goes only according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. What did Rabbi Yehuda say? The Amar, Rabbi Yehuda said, and this is something that Rabbi Yehuda said not only regarding a ksubah, but regarding any loan, any shtar you have for any loan. So he said, Achrayis to seiferhu. If in the shtar that was written, let's say a person borrowed $100, and there's a shtar that's written for this, and inside the shtar you did not add an achrayis, meaning that the borrower says that all of my properties are going to be a security for you to collect from these properties. Even if you didn't include it in the shtar, it doesn't matter. All of his properties still become an achrayis. They all still are a security to collect from there. And ta sefer. If it wasn't written into the shtar, it's a mistake of the scribe that wrote the shtar that he forgot to write it. And it's still going to be responsible for the payment without writing it. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So that goes with what it says in our Mishnah. By the ksubah, you didn't write clearly in the ksubah that all the properties could be collected for the ksubah, but still we say that it's a t'nai from bezdin. Just like by every shtar, we say even without writing it into the shtar, it's an automatic condition, and if it wasn't written, it's the mistake of the sefer. The Rab Meir. Now, if we would follow Rab Meir regarding this subject, Rab Meir says, Achrayis laftos seifuru. If in the shtar it does not say that all the fields are going to be a security for this loan, it's not. Only if it's written clearly. So if so, regarding a ksubah, we should say the same thing. Only if it's written clearly in the ksubah that all the properties are security for the ksubah, then it is. But if it's not written, then it's not. So the seif of the Mishnah does not go according to Rab Meir's opinion. So as we'll see soon, the Gemara is going to conclude. That's the question over here. The Reish is Rab Meir, and the Seif is Rab Yehuda. But the Gemara will bring now here the source, where we see this machlokes between Rab Meir and Rab Yehuda regarding a person that omitted this line in the shtar about the achrayis, about the security of all the properties. Is that a mistake, and therefore we anyways include it, or no, it's not included? It's not. So the source of this is a Mishnah Masechta Bava Metzia. It says there as follows: Matzah shtari chayv. If you find documents of a loan, found it on the street. So now what do you do with this? The malva, the lender says, give me back my shtaris. It belonged to me and I want to be able to collect my loan. So do we return it to the malva or not? So here's the halacha. So there's a machlokes about this. Im yesh ben achrayis nechasim. If you have these documents and you look inside and you see it's written in it clearly that the borrower is saying that all of his properties are going to be a security to have the lender collect from them. Now, what's the significance of this? Before I go right in the Gemara, the significance of this is, even now, if the borrower sells these properties to somebody else, the lender can come to the lekeach, to the buyers, and collect from the buyers and say, because these fields are security to me, to my loan. How could you buy them if I already had the rights to collect from them before you bought them? That's the significance in the case of the Zanachrayas, when it's written clearly in the shtar. So then the Mishnah says, Lo yachzer. You cannot return these shtaris to the malva. Why? Shebezin nefraim, man, because then the bezin will go and collect even from all kinds of properties, including if those properties were sold off to a lekeach, which is always known in the expression of the Gemara as mishubadim, properties that were already sold to somebody and they're mishubid. There's a lien on these properties that they belong to this person.
So we do the shtar.
So why do we not want to return the shtar to the malva in such a case? So Rashi brings from the Gemara in Bava Metzia that explains the reason is because we're afraid of something that's called a kenunya. A kenunya means that this is some kind of a conspiracy, some kind of a deal that there is between the loiv and the malva. Could be what happened over here is the malva already collected his loan, but the malva says to the loiv, you know what? Give me the shtar again, and now I'm going to collect this loan from this buyer a second time, and we'll divide between ourselves what I'm going to collect from the buyer. Okay, so therefore we're afraid for this kenunya, so we don't return the shtar to the malva. But if in the shtar it's not written that any of the properties are a security for this loan, so then yachzer. So then you can return it to the malva. She'ein bezin nefraim, man, because the bezin will not go collect from any buyer from these properties. So we're not afraid of any foul play over here between the malva and the loiva, that there's a conspiracy that they're trying to get from a property even after the loan was already collected once before. Divrei Rab Meir, this is Rab Meir's opinion. What's relevant for our Gemara? What we see over here is Rab Meir saying that there's a distinction regarding a shtar, a document of a loan, whether it actually has written in it that you could collect from the properties or not. And if it's not written in it, then you cannot collect from those properties. The Chachamim, however, the Chachamim disagree, and the Chachamim say, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh. Whatever loan it was, whatever shtar that is, it is, whether it's written in it, whether it's not written in it, lo yachsi, you can't return it to the malva. Shebezin nefraim, either way, Bezdin will collect from those properties even after the buyer bought it. So this is the Chachamim, and Rashi says, even though it says here the Chachamim, it includes Rabbi Yehuda as well, because Rabbi Yehuda was in that generation. So therefore Rabbi Yehuda, along with part of the Chachamim, holds that every shtar, whether it says in it Achrayis Nechasim, whether it doesn't, it's an automatic condition in the shtar. And it's called a Torah Sefer. The scribe omitted an obvious point that should have been written over here. If so, going back to our Mishnah, Reishe Rav Meir, the Reishe of our Mishnah that says that the amount of the Kesubos is always going to be 200 for a Basula and 100 for an Almana, there's no exceptions to that. That's Rav Meir. Rav Yehuda disagrees with that, as we brought before. And the Sefer when it says that whether you write the security in the shtar, whether you don't, it's always a condition. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. That's not Rav Meir. Rav Meir says it depends if you wrote it into the shtar or not. Now, if you'll try to answer and tell me as follows, Kula Rav Meir, we can say that our entire mission is Rav Meir. Maybe according to Rab Meir, there's a distinction between a ksubah and a regular star for a loan. Maybe when it comes to a regular star of a loan, Rab Meir says there's a distinction if you actually wrote into the star that you could collect from all properties. But when it comes to a ksubah, this is a t'nai bezdin. This is the condition from a bezdin. This is something which is much stronger. Over here, Rab Meir would agree that it doesn't make a difference if it was written into the ksubah or not. So the Gemara now will bring from a Braise that no, Rab Meir does not hold of this distinction. Is there any distinction according to Rab Meir between a ksubah and a shtar regarding this subject? Tanya, we learned in a Braise as follows: Chamisha, there are 5 individuals. Goivin mina mechuradin. They could only collect their loans from mechuradin. Mechuradin means properties that are free and clear, meaning it's still in the person that you're collecting from, it's still in his possession. He hasn't sold off his properties to anybody else yet. Again, in the expression of the Gemara, there's bnei chayrin and mishubadim. Mishubadim means properties that were already sold off to someone else. Mechuradin means properties that are still in his possession. So there are 5 individuals that could only collect from the one that they're collecting from those properties that are still in his possession. And these are the individuals. Peiris ushvach peiris. So what is this referring to? The fruits and the investment that you invested to improve and to improve the field that it should grow these fruits. This is talking about a case of a gazlan. As Rashi here brings the whole story, we're talking about a person that stole the property and then sold it. He sold the property that he stole. And now the buyer from this gazlan went and invested in this property and it grew beautiful fruits. Yeah. And now the nigzal, the original owner, is collecting the property. So what happens? The original owner, of course, can take back all his properties, but now this buyer, though, the buyer wants to collect the money that not only for what he paid for this property that was really a stolen property, but he also wants to collect for the payments that were taken away from him, and also for the money that he invested in improving the property. So when it comes to him collecting the money that he paid for the property, so he goes back to the gazlan and he says, pay me back the money that I paid for this property. That the gazlan is going to be obligated to pay him back, and you could collect from the gazlan from any of his possessions, not only from the properties that he has in his possession right now, but even from properties that he already sold off to somebody else, mishubadim. But when he wants to collect the peiris that were confiscated from him, or the shvach of the peiris, which is the money that the buyer invested into these properties, so that the gazlan only has to pay him from mechuradim, from properties that he has in his possession right now, and not from properties that he sold off. And also, v'amakabel all of lozan as ben ishtay ubas ishtay. Person that accepts upon himself to feed a son of his wife. He got married and his wife has her own children, and he takes upon himself to feed the son or the daughter of his wife, so they could collect from properties that this father or this husband has right now in his possession. And also the get chayv she'em bayachrayis, a get chayv, which means a regular shtar chayv, a regular document of a loan, that it's not written into it that you're taking responsibility, that all your fields will be your security for this. So this is Rab Meir's opinion, that if you don't write that into the shtar, then your fields will not become a security. And he says also, the Kesubos isha she'em ba'achrayis, the ksubah that you wrote for your wife and you did not add into it the security that all your properties become a security, also, so you could only collect what's currently in the possession of the husband or currently in the possession of the borrower. So whose opinion? Who's speaking here in this braise? Who's the opinion that says that if you did not write the security into the shtar, it's not a mistake to describe. That means that you did not take this responsibility. Rab Meir, this is Rab Meir speaking here. Okatani, and it says clearly here in this braise, Kesubos isha, that a ksubah of a isha is the same like a shtar chayv, just like or the braise calls it a get chayv. Get and shtar is the same thing in this sense. Just like by a regular document of a loan, if you don't write a security, then you do not take that responsibility. It's the same with the ksubah. If you don't write it into the ksubah, you don't take that responsibility. So we're back to our original question. The Reisha of the Mishnah is Rab Meir, and the Seifa of the Mishnah must be following Rab Yehuda that says that even if you did not write it into the ksubah, you still took that responsibility, like our Mishnah said, that it's a t'nai bezdin. So the Gemara gives 2 answers to this. If you want, I can answer you, Rab Meir, that our Mishnah does all go according to Rab Meir. Rab Yehuda. Or I can answer you the entire Mishnah is Rab Yehuda. I could tell you the whole Mishnah goes right like Rab Yehuda. So what was our question? If it goes according to Rabbi Yehuda, in the Reish of our Mishnah, it says you could never have a ksuba that's less than the full amount. Rabbi Yehuda said that you could have a ksuba that's less than the full amount. She could write, or she could forgive half. She could say, I got already half. Says the Gemara, that's different. Hasam kasvele is kabalti. Over there, if she's going to write clearly to her husband, I already got half. She's clearly writing that she forgives half, then the husband doesn't have to give more. In our Mishnah that it says that a wife always gets the full ksubas because she didn't write this to her husband. She never forgave it. That's when our Mishnah says that she gets the full ksuba. But even in our Mishnah, if the wife would write clearly his kabalti, that I got already half, so then the husband wouldn't have to give the full ksuba. So the whole Mishnah could be Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rab Meir, or we could say that the whole Mishnah is Rab Meir. So what was our question? So why in the Seif of the Mishnah did it say that if you did not write in the ksuba that all the properties are a security, they still do become a security to collect the ksuba from there? So the Gemara explains, my chayiv the ketani, when it said in our Mishnah that even without writing it, she could collect from all of the properties, it didn't mean you could collect from the properties after the husband sold them off to a buyer. What it meant to say is it could be collected from the husband only if it's still in his possession. And that's true by any time you owe money. If you owe money, including over here the ksuba, if these are still properties in your possession, the person that you owe it to could come and collect from whatever you own. So therefore the whole Mishnah could go according to Rab Meir. Okay. Like Kasavla, this goes to the next part of the Mishnah, which spoke about the fact that a person's wife was in captivity, and then he, even without writing into the ksuba that you take responsibility to free her, to pay for her release, but nevertheless you have that obligation. And the Mishnah made a distinction between a wife married to a Yisrael and a wife married to a Kayin, that by the case of Yisrael, she can go back to her husband. By the case of a Kayin, he frees her, but he has to take her back home. She can't live with him again. Why? Because the assumption is that she probably had a relationship with a guy in captivity, but against her will. It was probably against her will. So therefore, with a kite, she can't go back to the husband, because a kite is not allowed to live with a wife that had a relation with someone else even against her will. But with a Yisrael, he could have a relation with his wife even after she had a relation with someone else against her will. But now, here the Gemara says a big chiddush about this. Amar Avur de Shmuel, the father of Shmuel, said as follows: Eishes Yisrael Shenensa, the wife of Yisrael, even if she had a relation with someone else against her will, asura lebaila, she still will be forbidden to go back to her husband.
Why?
The reason is chayshinan, because what we're concerned of is shema, possibly tchilasa b'aynis. In the beginning, it was an aynis, it was taka against the world, but v'saifa, but then afterwards, b'ratzayin, it was done willingly. So therefore, if there's any will that she's doing this with in this act, so then she's not allowed to go back to her husband. So therefore, it's also for her to go back to even her husband, a Yisrael. Okay, there's a discussion in Rishonim exactly beneged to what it says here. Seifa beratzen, whether the Seifa beratzen has to be dafkin or oifen, where she clearly says that it's beratzen, even without her clearly saying it. But this is the point that the father of Shmuel said, that even if it's an aynes, she can't go back to her husband, because in the end it is beratzen. So Rav asks the father of Shmuel about this. So it says in the Kesubos that a person says to his wife, we learned in the Mishnah, Im tishtaboy, if you're going to be captured, efrakinach, I will redeem you, and I will bring you back to me to be my wife. So how could you say that in a case when it was against her will, we still say that at the end we're concerned that it was beratzen, and therefore she can't go back to her husband? And the Mishnah clearly says, you'll be my wife again. Ishtik. So the father Shmuel was quiet, he didn't know how to answer this question. Kari Rav alei de Shmuel, Avu de Shmuel, so Rav said a pasuk for the father of Shmuel when he couldn't answer. Sarim otzru b'milim, ministers, they were stopped with words. He didn't have words to answer. V'kaf yasimu lepiyam, and he put a palm on his mouth because he didn't have an answer. And why did the Rav say for the father of Shmuel this pasuk? Because really there is an answer he could have said. My islay lemema. What's an answer that he could have given from the question from our Mishnah? He should have said as follows. And this is something we had earlier in the Masechta here. B'shvuya hikilu. We find regarding a woman that gets captured that Chachamim have certain leniencies that are applied to this case and that do not apply in other cases. So maybe over here, even if usually we say that a woman that had a relation with someone else against her will, she can't go back to her husband because we say in the end it was beratzain. But regarding a woman that got captured, we're lenient about this and we allow her to go back to her husband. Now the Gemara asks another question on the father of Shmuel. Lavu de Shmuel, according to the father of Shmuel, Ayin is the Shari Rachmana. This idea that we always talk about, we always say regarding a Yisrael, that if she had a relation with someone else against her will after she's married, and the Torah allows her to go back to her husband, how's this ever possible? You're always saying that we're concerned that in the end it was Beratz, and so she can't go back to her husband, even a Yisrael. Answers the Gemara, the case will be if there are witnesses that are going to come along and tell us that we were present and we saw that she was protesting from the beginning until the end, so then we know that the whole thing was blindness. Only then she can go back to her husband. Says the Gemara, what the father of Shmuel says argues on what Rava said. Rava said, Kol shetchilasa ba'aynes and v'sayif beratzen. Any case when someone forced her into a relationship against her will, and in the end it was with her consent, it was beratzen, it doesn't matter, and afile hiya menes, and even if it's with her will to the extent that she comes and says hanichu loi, let this person, don't bother him. Why shall male niskak law? And she's speaking now about herself, and she's saying, because even if this person would not be forcing me, but nevertheless, he's sechrasei, I would hire him. I'm very happy with what he's doing. I'm happy with this act. Nevertheless, muteres, she's still allowed to go back to her husband, even though it's so clear that it's seif beratzen. It's so clear that at this point she's enjoying it. And reason is because even this itself is truly against her will. My time, yetzer albisha, because the man that forced her into this, he forced this desire upon her. Even though now she does have this desire, but he forced her into a situation where now she's enjoying it, and therefore even this itself is not really considered to be beratzen. Tanya Kava say that Rava, so not Rava, there's a brayse that says like Rava. There's a pasuk where it says, this is the pasuk where it's the source, that if it's against her will, she can go back to her husband, and if it's with a will, with her consent, that she had a relation with someone else, she cannot go back to her husband. The pasuk says, "V'hi loy nispasa." If she was not forced, then asura, then she cannot go back to her husband. Ha nispasa. But if she was forced, muteres, then she is allowed to go to her husband. But now the diak over here is the word vihi. Vihi means only in this case, which means there's an exception in another case. That means that there's another case, that even if she was not forced, even if it was done with her will, muteres, she can still go back to her husband. When's this? If in the beginning it was blindness, but in the end it was beratzain, so at that point it's already loinus pasa, nevertheless, she can go back to her husband. Now the Gemara is going to bring another few interpretations to this pasuk, and especially this extra word vihi, that what exactly we exclude from this vihi. Tanya Yidach, and another brayse we learned vihi loinus pasa. When it says there in this pasuk, what does it mean? That if it was not by force, asura, she's not allowed to go back to her husband. Ha nispasa, but if it was by force, muteres, she's allowed to go back to her husband. But because it says vihi, we say v'yesh lacha cheres. There's another case, shafal pisha nispasa, that even if it was by force, asura, she's not allowed to go back to her husband. And ve'ezuzu, and what case is this? Eishes kayin, the wife of a kayin. This is the source that the wife of a kayin, if she had a relation with someone else, she may not go back to her husband, a kayin. Amar Rav Yudah Mashmol Mishum Rabbi Shmuel. Yet another pshat to what we learn out from this vihi over here. Vihi nispasa asura. If it was not by force, so then she's allowed to go back to her husband. Hanispasa, but if it was by force, muteres, she's allowed to go back to her husband. But again, what are we dashing from the word vihi? V'yesh l'cha acheres, that there's an exception. There is another case, she'afal pi shaloi nispasa, that even if it was not by force, muteres, she's allowed to go, she's going to be allowed, she's going to be free. And when is this? When is there a situation that she had a relation with someone else and it was not by force, but nevertheless she's going to be totally mutter to leave from this man? That's what it means over here. What case is this? In a situation where she gets married to somebody and it turns out that the entire kedushin was a mistake. What's the case? The case over here is, as Rashi explains, there was a condition that was made for the marriage, and it turns out that the condition made was never fulfilled. So therefore the whole condition was a mistake in the first place. A condition, whatever it was. So then if she was married to this person, even if she already had children with him, or she has a son that's riding on her shoulders, nevertheless, she can refuse this marriage and she can walk off without a get, because it turns out that the entire kedushin was a mistake. So she was living with this person willingly, it was not nispasa, but nevertheless, mutaras, she can walk off. Rav Yehuda said, Hani noshi de gonvu ganvi. These women that the thieves, they steal them. They take these thieves to have a relation with them. Sharian legevraya. They're allowed to go back to their husbands, which is a Yisrael. So Rabbana said to Rav Yehuda regarding this, we see in this situation that these women that are caught by these thieves, that they bring bread for those thieves that catch them. We see that they're serving their thieves. So don't we see that they're there already with their consent? So the Gemara says, no, that doesn't prove anything. The only reason why they're serving the people that are capture them is because they're afraid. But we see that these women that they capture are also bringing to the thieves their arrows that they use. So they're serving them even to this extent. Again, the Gemara says it doesn't prove anything. They're only doing it because they're afraid. But it's all against their will, so therefore they'll be allowed to go back to their husband. But if these thieves allow them to go back, to leave, but they go on their own, and they want to stay with the thieves, asira. So then, of course, they're going to be usher to go back to their husbands. We learned if you had women that were captured by a king, so we treat them like the halacha of a woman that's captured, and she's allowed to go back to her husband because whatever relation she had was against her will. Genuve listis, but if they were captured by thieves, so then einan kishvuyin, we do not treat them like women that are captured that had a relation against their will. And over here, we're going to assume, or we're going to be suspicious that maybe they had a relation with this thief with their consent, and therefore they're not going to be allowed to go back to their husband. And the Gemara will explain soon why. But first, the Gemara asks that v'hatanya ipche. There's another braisa that we learned exactly the reverse. That it says that if they're captured by a king, then they are allowed to go back. They're not allowed to go back to their husbands, and if they're captured by a listis, by thieves, then they could go back to their husbands. So how do we answer this contradiction? So the Gemara explains and says, Malchos loi kashya, that the question that we had regarding a woman that's captured by a king, whether she's allowed to go back to her husband or not, is not a contradiction. It depends what kind of king this is. If she's being captured by such a great king, like Achashverosh, or someone similar that's so great like Achashverosh, so as Rashi explains, in such a case, because he's such a great king, so therefore she's not assuming that the king is capturing her because she's going to become the queen one day. So therefore, she's not interested in this entire relationship with the king. So there's no consent involved there. So she can go back to her husband. And Malchus ben Netzar. But by Malchus ben Netzar, which is a king that's not a king like Achashverosh, Rashi says this is Ben Netzar was this thief that captured different territories, and he was a king over certain territories. So in such a case, when this woman is captured by this Ben Netzar, we are concerned that possibly this woman is thinking to herself that he's going to marry me, and I'm going to become this queen. So therefore, in such a case, she can't go back to her husband. Okay. The Gemara says, listis loikashya. Same thing also when it says the contradiction we had regarding a woman that was captured by a thief, whether she can go back to her husband or not, it's not a contradiction. Again, based on what we just said, ha ben Netzar. When there's this thief that already captured certain territories, like this individual Ben Netzar. So over here, we're concerned that she has a relation with him with her consent because she's thinking that she's going to become a prominent woman and she's going to marry him. Ha balistim da'alma. And then there's a listim da'alma, Stama thief. He didn't capture any territory. Stama thief, no woman wants to be with Stama thief, and therefore we know for sure she had no relation with him with her consent. So she can go back to her husband. Or Ben Netzar. So the Gemara asks, on this answer you just gave here, or Ben Netzar, this individual, this thief that captured certain territories, Hasan Karile Melech, in the first braisa you refer to him as a king, and Va'acha Karile Listim, and over here you're referring to him, or in the second braisa you refer to him as a king, and before in the first braisa you refer to him as a thief. So the Gemara says, yes, it depends in contrast to what? Gabi Achashverosh, when we're speaking about a great king like Achashverosh, so listim. So this Ben Netzar is not on that level at all, so he's considered to be just a thief. Gabi listim, when we're speaking about listim da'alma, just a thief that owns no territory, so melachu. So this Ben Netzar, which is a thief that owns territory, so he's considered to be a king. So that's the answer in the Brais here. If you just want to take a look into the second to last Taisus, so Taisus brings up Esther. And Taisus says, when it comes to Esther, over there, it's a different story. She'll for sure be mutter to Mordechai because she's a tzadekes gemura. So over there, there's no issues whatsoever.
There's a totally different thing with Esther.
Okay, this is going back to what the father of Shmuel said. The father of Shmuel said, he argues in this whole thing, right? The father of Shmuel says that any woman that's in captivity will always concerned that maybe it's Soifa Baratzen. So on that, Taisa says, even the father of Shmuel will agree that that's not true by a Tzedekes Gemara like Esther. We're not Choshesh for Soifa Baratzen.
Right. You know what?